I have never liked mirrors. When I was a child, my mother always found dozens of flaws in my reflection. My skin was too pale, my hair was too dull, my shoulders were too broad. Now, looking at myself in the mirrored door of the elevator at the Atlas Logistic office building, I could still hear her voice. "Willow, if you don't start taking care of yourself, no one will ever look at you." I adjusted the collar of my blouse and sighed. 32 years old, and I was still fighting the ghosts of my past. The elevator doors opened on the 7th floor, and I walked decisively toward my office. The sign, Willow Kessler, Regional Director, always made me feel a mixture of pride and slight disbelief. Had I really done it? Was the girl who ran away from home with $200 in her pocket and an old backpack now running an entire department? "Good morning, Miss Kessler," my assistant Prue greeted me. "You have a meeting at 10:30 with representatives from Northwest Shipping and a conference call with headquarters at 2 o'clock. "Thanks, Prue. Coffee would be nice." I closed the office door behind me and leaned against it for a moment. Here, within these four walls, I felt safe. Here, I was respected for my intelligence, my decisions, my professionalism. Here, no one reminded me that I had always been a disappointment. My phone vibrated. I took it out of my bag and saw a message from my father. "Don't forget about Saturday. Tally will be very happy to see you." I smirked. Happy? My younger sister Tally would hardly have remembered I existed if it weren't for my father's insistence. Ever since she met her billionaire fiancé, her social circle had narrowed to people with 6 figures in their bank accounts. "I'll try," I replied, even though I already knew I'd probably find an excuse not to go. The thought of spending the evening under my mother's critical gaze made me feel like I was 15 again. Prue brought me coffee, and I immersed myself in my work. Logistics had always seemed like the perfect field to me. Clear rules, understandable processes, measurable results. Unlike people, cargo has no hidden motives. It just has to get from point A to point B on time and in one piece. By evening, having dealt with the urgent matters, I returned to my apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Franklin. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a kitchen, and a balcony overlooking the park. But it was mine. Bought with my own money, without anyone's help. Here I could be myself. I kicked off my high heels, changed into my loungewear, and poured myself a glass of wine. On the coffee table lay the formal invitation to Tally and Ezra Foster's engagement party. Thick cream-colored paper, gold embossing, calligraphic font. My mother had always loved ostentatious luxury. "Mrs. Veronica Kessler and Mr. Raymond Kessler invite you to share in the joy of the engagement of their daughter, Tallulah Kessler, to Mr. Ezra Foster." I took a sip of wine and looked at my phone. I had to come up with a good excuse for not going. A migraine? Too obvious. Urgent business trip? They could check. Maybe just tell the truth, that I didn't want another dose of criticism and comparisons to my successful younger sister? My phone rang and I saw Dad on the screen. Sighing, I answered, "Hi, Dad." "Willow, sweetheart, did you get the invitation?" There was hope in his voice that made me wince with guilt. My father had always been caught between 2 fires, between a wife who considered me a failure and a daughter who had finally given up trying to live up to impossible standards. "Yes, I got it, but I'm not sure I can make it. I have a lot of work and—" "Please, Willie," he used my childhood nickname, which always worked on me. "This is an important day for the family. Tally is marrying a wonderful young man, and I miss you." The last sentence was spoken more quietly, as if he was afraid my mother might hear. In our family, showing affection for the wrong daughter was almost treason. "I'll think about it, Dad. I really will." "That's all I ask," he said, relief evident in his voice. "How's work?" "It's going well. We signed a new contract with a tech company. It's a big project." "I'm proud of you. You know that?" he said so quietly that I could barely hear him. After talking to my father, I sat for a long time looking at the invitation. Part of me wanted to show my mother what I had achieved without her support. Another part reminded me that no matter what I achieved, I would never be good enough in her eyes. I wavered for the next few days, but in the end, the decision was made. I would go to the engagement party, not for my mother or Tally, but for my father and maybe a little bit for myself. It was time to stop running away. On Saturday evening, I parked in front of my parents' house. It was a large, colonial-style mansion with a manicured lawn, perfectly trimmed bushes, and a fountain in front of the front entrance. A classic display of status in the small town of Franklin. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and got out of the car. For the evening, I chose a simple black dress. Elegant, but not flashy. My auburn hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and my makeup was minimal. I knew my mother would find something to criticize, so I didn't see the point in trying too hard. The front door was open, and the sounds of classical music and muffled conversation drifted out. I paused on the threshold for a moment, gathering my courage, then entered. The living room was full of people, family friends, relatives, my father's business associates. I hadn't seen many of them in years. Some raised their eyebrows in surprise when they recognized me. I heard whispers, "That's the Kesslers' eldest daughter. Yes, the one who ran away. I think she works somewhere in the city." I lifted my chin proudly and moved across the room, looking for my father. Instead, I ran into my mother. Veronica Kessler, impeccable in her gray silk dress and pearl necklace, looked like she had just stepped off the cover of a magazine for wealthy housewives. Her gaze slid over me from head to toe, and I could physically feel her disapproval. "Willow," she said, without the slightest hint of warmth. "What a surprise. I was sure you'd find another reason not to come." "Hello, Mom." I leaned in to kiss her on the cheek, but she pulled away slightly, pretending to fix her hair. I couldn't miss such an important event. "Of course." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Tally will be surprised. She's with Ezra in the conservatory, receiving congratulations from important guests." The emphasis on the word important didn't escape me. "Then I won't get in the way. I'll go look for Dad." I turned away, but her voice stopped me. "Your dress is a little tight around the waist, dear. Maybe you should have chosen a larger size." There it was, the first comment, even earlier than I had expected. I took a deep breath and without turning around moved on. I found my father at the bar, where he was talking quietly with an elderly man. When he saw me, he broke into a sincere smile and opened his arms wide. "Willie, you came." I allowed myself to melt into his embrace for a moment, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. "Of course I came. I promised I'd think about it." He stepped back, holding me by the shoulders and looking at me with undisguised pride. "You look beautiful, a real businesswoman." "Thank you, Dad," I said, feeling a lump rise in my throat. At least one person in this family was genuinely happy to see me. My father introduced me to his companion, an old friend from college, it turned out, and for a while I was absorbed in casual conversation. Maybe this evening wouldn't be as awful as I'd feared. That illusion was shattered when Tally appeared in the living room. My younger sister had always been beautiful, but tonight she was radiant. A long pink dress, perfect hair, a sparkling engagement ring. Standing next to her was a tall man with dark hair and attentive eyes. It must have been the famous Ezra Foster. I had never met him, but judging by my father's enthusiastic stories, he was something of a tech prodigy who had made his first billion before the age of 30. Tally noticed me, and a look of surprise flashed across her face, quickly replaced by a forced smile. "Willow! What a surprise!" She repeated her mother's words with the same intonation. "I thought you were too busy for family events." "Congratulations on your engagement, Tally." I ignored the dig and smiled sincerely. Despite our complicated history, I didn't wish her any harm. Tally gave me a casual hug, trying not to wrinkle her expensive dress, and immediately turned to her fiancé. "Ezra, this is my older sister Willow. She works in logistics, I think." "I'm the regional director of Atlas Logistics," I said, extending my hand to Ezra. "Nice to meet you." He shook my hand firmly, and something like recognition flashed in his eyes, but the moment was interrupted by the appearance of my mother. "Tally, dear, the Bergmans want to take a photo of you and Ezra for their society column." She literally pushed me aside with her shoulder, wedging herself between me and the couple. "Willow, could you help with the appetizers? I think we need some extra hands in the kitchen." It wasn't a question, but a poorly disguised order to stay away from the important guests. I clenched my teeth but said nothing. I didn't want to cause a scene. I spent the next hour shuttling between guests with a tray of canapés, as if I were not a member of the family but hired help. Some of the guests who knew me from childhood gave me confused looks, but no one dared to comment on the strange situation. When the tray was empty, I returned to the kitchen, where two women in catering uniforms were bustling about. "Excuse me," I said to one of them. "Where should I put this?" The woman looked at me in surprise. "Are you a guest?" "Mrs. Kessler said you were helping, but we're fine. Go back to the party." I silently put down the tray and left the kitchen, feeling anger rising inside me. It was humiliating, even by my mother's standards. In the living room, all eyes were on Tally and Ezra. They stood in the center of the room, accepting congratulations. My mother circled around them like a planet around a double star, beaming with pride and carefully controlling who could approach the happy couple and when. I quietly approached my father, who was standing a little apart. "Dad, I think it's time for me to go." He turned to me with a disappointed look on his face. "Already? But there hasn't even been a formal toast yet. I was hoping we could talk a little, find out how you've been—" "My presence here is clearly not welcome." I nodded toward my mother, who had just cast a disapproving glance in my direction. "Don't mind Mom, you know how she is. She always wants everything to be perfect." "Perfect means without me," I smiled bitterly. My father wanted to say something, but at that moment a glass clinked. All conversation stopped, and Veronica Kessler became the center of attention. "Dear friends, today is a special day for our family. Our beloved daughter Tallulah is engaged to a wonderful young man, Ezra Foster. Raymond and I couldn't have dreamed of a better groom for our girl." I crossed my arms over my chest, trying not to show how much those words hurt me. Our beloved daughter. As if they only had one daughter, not two. "Tally has always been our pride and joy," her mother continued, her gaze lingering on me for a moment. "She has never disappointed us, always made the right decisions and followed our advice. And now look at her. A wonderful education, a successful career in interior design, and now she's engaged to one of the most promising businessmen of our time." A murmur of approval ran through the room. I felt my father tense up beside me. "Let's raise our glasses to Tally and Ezra, to their happy future." Everyone raised their glasses, including me. I wasn't going to stoop to petty resentment, at least not in public. After the toast, the guests split into groups again. I was about to slip away unnoticed when my Aunt Martha, my father's sister, approached me. "Willow dear, it's been so long. How you've grown," she hugged me. "Your father told me you've had an amazing career." "Regional director, no less." I smiled, feeling comfortable for the first time that evening. "Thank you, Aunt Martha. Yes, I like my job. It's challenging, but there are lots of opportunities. I always knew you would go far. You always had a head for business, even as a child. Remember how you organized that lemonade stand when you were 12? You made all the neighborhood kids work for you." We both laughed, and I felt a gaze on me. Turning around, I saw my mother, who was clearly unhappy that I was attracting attention. She approached us with a forced smile. "Martha, dear, Tally would like to show you her ring up close. She knows you appreciate fine diamonds." It was an obvious attempt to separate us, and Aunt Martha understood. She gave me an apologetic look and let Veronica lead her away. Left alone, I decided I'd had enough. I would find my father, say goodbye, and leave. But I hadn't taken 2 steps before my mother appeared beside me again, this time her face contorted with poorly concealed anger. "What are you doing, Willow?" she hissed, grabbing me by the elbow and pulling me aside. "What are you talking about, Mom? I was just talking to Aunt Martha." "You're trying to ruin Tally's evening. It's her day, her celebration, and you, as always, are trying to draw attention to yourself." I stared at her in amazement. Draw attention to myself? I've been trying to be invisible all night. You sent me out to serve the appetizers like I'm not part of the family, like I'm a servant. "Lower your voice," she said, her fingers digging into my elbow. "You've always been a problem, Willow. Always doing everything against the grain. Running away from home, refusing our help, choosing some obscure career instead of a decent marriage. And now you show up here, at your sister's engagement party, trying to steal her moment of glory." I pulled my arm away, feeling myself boiling with indignation. "I came because Dad asked me to, because despite everything, you're my family. But I guess I was wrong. Yes, you were wrong. Her eyes narrowed. You're not invited. What? I couldn't believe my ears. You weren't on the guest list. I didn't send you an invitation. It was your father behind my back. I felt the ground slip away from under my feet. All these years I thought my mother simply disapproved of my choice, but she had literally cut me out of the family. Go, Willow. Her voice was as cold as ice. Go now, before you ruin the evening even more. I looked back and saw that several guests were already looking in our direction with curiosity. My mother had just made a scene in front of everyone, and as usual, I was to blame. Fine. I straightened my back. I'll leave, but not because you said so, because I want to. I turned to find my father and say goodbye, but my mother grabbed my arm again. Just go. Don't cause any more trouble. At that moment, we were interrupted by a loud voice. Miss Kessler, Willow Kessler? All heads turned toward the source of the voice. It was Ezra Foster, Tally's fiancé. He looked straight at me with an expression of surprise and recognition. My God, it's really you. He smiled broadly and made his way across the room toward us. I couldn't believe it when I heard your name. Willow Kessler from Atlas Logistics? My mother froze beside me, her face a picture of confusion. Yes, it's me. I smiled politely, not sure where he was going with this. Ezra approached me and, to everyone's amazement, bowed slightly. This is my boss, he announced loudly so that everyone could hear. Or rather, my partner and, in a sense, the boss of my new logistics project. The room fell completely silent. I felt all eyes on me. My mother turned pale and froze with her mouth open. Tally, standing nearby, looked as if someone had punched her in the stomach. I didn't know what to say. Ezra continued to smile, clearly unaware of the bomb he had just dropped in the Kessler home. Time seemed to stand still. I stood in the middle of my parents' living room, feeling the eyes of everyone present on me. Ezra Foster's words still rang in the air. She's my boss! The room was so quiet that you could hear the old clock ticking on the mantelpiece. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep a calm expression on my face. Inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions, embarrassment at the sudden attention, surprise at Ezra's words, and, I admit, a dark satisfaction at the look on my mother's face. Veronica Kessler stood frozen with her mouth half open, her flawless makeup unable to hide her deathly pallor. Next to her, Tally looked as if she had swallowed a whole lemon. Excuse me? My mother finally managed to say, shifting her gaze from me to Ezra and back. There must be some mistake. Ezra seemed to only now notice the tension in the air. His enthusiasm faded a little, but his smile remained. No mistake, Mrs. Kessler, he said, moving closer to me as if to take my side in this invisible confrontation. Atlas Logistics, the company Willow works for, won the bid to handle logistics for my new project, Nexus Tech. A very competitive tender, by the way. I was impressed by their proposal. I saw the guests begin to exchange glances and whisper. Mrs. Fleming, a longtime friend of my mother's and Franklin's chief gossip, made no attempt to hide her surprise and eager interest in what was happening. Keeping my composure, I said, Mr. Foster is exaggerating my role. I'm just coordinating the logistics aspect of the project. Don't be modest, Miss Kessler, Ezra shook his head. Your strategic thinking has impressed me greatly. I personally insisted that Atlas Logistic be awarded the contract after your team's presentation. My father, who had been standing aside the whole time, suddenly stepped forward, his face beaming with genuine pride. Willow, you never told us about this project. There wasn't a chance, I shrugged, trying to sound casual. The contract was only signed last week, and I didn't know that Mr. Foster was connected to our family. My mother finally pulled herself together. Her face took on its usual expression of a society lady, but her eyes remained cold. What an amazing coincidence, she said with a forced smile. Tally, dear, did you know about this? My sister, who had seemed in a daze the whole time, finally approached her fiancé and took his arm. Her smile was as fake as her mother's. Of course I did, she lied with an ease that would have impressed a professional actor. Ezra talked a lot about his new logistics partner. I just didn't think it was important to mention. Ezra looked at her in surprise but said nothing. Instead, he turned back to me. Miss Kessler, I've been meaning to discuss some details of the project with you. Perhaps now isn't the best time, but since we've met." The guests began to return to their conversations, although I felt that our little drama remained the main topic of discussion. Seeing that the situation was getting out of hand, my mother quickly intervened. "Ezra, dear, I'm sure business can wait. Today is a special day for you and Tally." "It will only take a few minutes," Ezra insisted. "Besides, it could be beneficial for all of us. Willow, can I talk to you in private?" Before my mother could think of another reason to refuse, I nodded. "Of course, Mr. Foster. Please, call me Ezra. We're practically family now." He smiled, and something like mischief flashed in his eyes. He was clearly enjoying the situation. We moved into a small library adjoining the living room. Once behind the closed door, Ezra immediately relaxed and sank into a leather armchair with a sigh of relief. "I apologize for the little performance," he said, running a hand through his dark hair. "But when I saw how you were being treated, I just couldn't keep quiet." I sat down cautiously opposite him, still not understanding what was going on. "You really knew who I was?" "Of course," he smiled. "I was at the final presentation of Atlas Logistic. You were magnificent, by the way. I knew right away that I wanted to work with your company. But when Tally mentioned that her sister's name was Willow Kessler, I thought it was a funny coincidence. Franklin is a small town after all. And then I saw you today and realized it was really you. And you decided to announce it to the whole room." I couldn't help but smile slightly. "I admit it was impulsive." Ezra shook his head. "But I heard what your mother said to you. You're not invited. That was not very nice of her." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, so he had heard our conversation. "My mom and I never really got along," I said simply, not wanting to go into details. "I can tell," Ezra nodded. "You know, I wasn't the perfect son either. My parents wanted me to follow in their footsteps and become a doctor. They were very disappointed when I dropped out of medical school to start a startup." "And how did they react when your startup made you billions?" I asked curiously. Ezra laughed, but there was a hint of bitterness in his laughter. "My father still thinks I'm wasting my life. He says money isn't a measure of success, and that I could be saving lives instead of developing useless gadgets." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. It's not every day you learn that a successful billionaire also faces parental disapproval. "What about your mother?" "She's more practical," Ezra smiled. "After the first million, her criticism decreased significantly, and after the 10th, she started bragging to her friends about her brilliant entrepreneur son." We both laughed, and I felt the tension I had been feeling all evening begin to ease. "But let's get back to business." Ezra suddenly became serious. "I really wanted to talk to you about the project. Your team has done an excellent job with the preliminary plan, but there are a few points I'd like to discuss in person." For the next 20 minutes, we immersed ourselves in a discussion of the logistical aspects of the Nexus Tech project. Ezra turned out to be not just a businessman, but also a deep strategist with an understanding of the intricacies of supply and distribution. I was impressed by his knowledge and ideas. "You know," he said at one point, "it's always amazed me how little attention technology companies pay to logistics. Everyone talks about software, algorithms, artificial intelligence. But at the end of the day, if your physical product doesn't reach the consumer on time and in one piece, nothing else matters." "Exactly," I nodded, glad to finally be talking to someone who understood the importance of my work. "Logistics is the invisible foundation of any business. Customers only notice it when something goes wrong." "How did you get into this field?" Ezra asked with genuine interest. "It's not the most obvious career choice for a young woman." I paused for a moment, wondering how much personal information to reveal. "I've always loved solving complex problems and seeing concrete results from my work," I finally replied. "After college, I took an entry-level position at Atlas Logistics and gradually worked my way up the career ladder. I like that everything in logistics is measurable and transparent. Either the shipment arrives on time or it doesn't. Either the system works efficiently or it needs improvement." "I see," Ezra nodded. "I appreciate that approach. There's too much smoke and mirrors in the tech world, Everyone talks about revolutionary innovations and disruptive technologies, but at the end of the day, only one thing matters. Does your product work, and does it make people's lives better? Our conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Without waiting for a response, Tally entered the library. Her smile was forced, her eyes flashing. "There you are," she exclaimed with feigned cheerfulness. "Your guests are asking for you, Ezra, and Mom would like to make another toast." Ezra stood up and held out his hand to me. "It was very nice talking to you, Miss Kessler. I hope we can continue this conversation soon. Perhaps over dinner next week?" "I'd love to," I said, shaking his hand and ignoring my sister's disapproving glance. We returned to the living room, where the guests had gathered around the makeshift stage. My mother stood in the center with a glass of champagne, smiling radiantly. When she saw us, her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Here are our lovebirds," she exclaimed, gesturing to Ezra and Tally. "And of course, Willow," she added with obvious effort. "As I recently learned, my eldest daughter is an important business partner of Ezra's. What an amazing coincidence!" The guests murmured approvingly. I noticed that some of those who had not even deigned to look at me before were now looking at me with interest. "Yes," my mother continued, raising her glass. "We always knew Willow had business acumen. She's always been so determined." I had to stifle a laugh. An hour ago, determined coming from her would have sounded like stubborn or unable to take reasonable advice. "To Tally and Ezra," my mother proclaimed, "and to the new business opportunities their union will bring to our entire family." Everyone raised their glasses. I took a sip of champagne, watching my mother artfully transition from publicly humiliating her daughter to bragging about her business connections in a matter of minutes. It would have been impressive if it hadn't been so hypocritical. After the toast, guests began to approach me, suddenly interested in my career and my project with Ezra's company. Even Uncle Howard, who had barely acknowledged me before, was now interested in investment opportunities in the logistics sector. I responded politely but briefly, not wanting to turn my sister's engagement into my business presentation. At one point, my father appeared next to me, and I could see an apology in his eyes. "I'm sorry about all this, Willie," he said quietly. "I didn't know Mom didn't send you an invitation. I thought she just forgot to mention you on the seating chart." "It's okay, Dad." I squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you insisted I come. Otherwise, I would have missed this interesting evening." He smiled weakly, but his eyes remained sad. "I've always been proud of you, you know. Even when I didn't say it out loud. Even when I let your mother—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. "I know, Dad," I nodded, "and I don't hold it against you." Our moment was interrupted by my mother, who glided over to us with a forced smile. "Willow, dear," she said with such false warmth that it made me physically uncomfortable. "I'm so glad you could come today. And what a surprise with this project. You should have told us earlier." "I tried, Mom," I replied calmly, "but you were too busy telling everyone that I wasn't invited to this party." My mother flinched as if she had been struck, but quickly regained her composure. "What a misunderstanding," she laughed nervously. "Of course you were invited. There was just a mix-up with the invitations. You know how it is when you're organizing events like this." "Of course," I nodded, not wanting to make a scene. "Just a misunderstanding." My mother lowered her voice to a whisper. "Ezra seems to think very highly of your work. It's impressive. Perhaps we should talk more, discuss opportunities for a family business. Your father always said you had potential." I felt a lump of disgust rise in my throat. For 32 years, my mother had considered me a failure, and now, upon learning of my connections, she had suddenly discovered my potential? "I'm very busy, Mom," I replied coldly. "I have a tight schedule." "But you'll make time for family, won't you?" She put her hand on my shoulder, and I struggled to suppress the urge to pull away. "We could have a family dinner next week. Discuss possibilities." "We'll see," I replied evasively, knowing full well that it would never happen. My mother wanted to say something else, but one of the guests caught her attention, and she excused herself and walked away. I exhaled with relief. My father, who had been standing next to me the whole time, shook his head. She'll never change, will she? No, Dad. I realized that a long time ago. He sighed and squeezed my hand. I'll call you tomorrow. Maybe we can get coffee on the weekend, just you and me. I'd love to, I replied sincerely. As I headed to the bar for another drink, I bumped into Tally. Her smile disappeared as soon as we were alone. What are you doing, Willow? She hissed. What do you mean? I genuinely didn't understand her aggression. You know what I mean. Showing up here, trying to steal my attention, flirting with my fiancé. Flirting? I couldn't believe my ears. We were discussing business, Tally, logistics. If that's your idea of flirting, I feel sorry for your personal life. She frowned but continued. This was supposed to be my day. Mine. And now all anyone can talk about is you and your important work. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Tally, I wasn't trying to draw attention to myself. It was Ezra who decided to announce our business partnership, and to be honest, it only happened after my mother publicly humiliated me and tried to kick me out. You've always been so dramatic, Tally rolled her eyes. Mom just wanted everything to be perfect. Perfect for whom? For you or for her? I shook my head. It doesn't matter. I don't want to argue today. It's your day and I'm leaving. I turned to go, but Tally grabbed my arm. Wait, she said, her voice suddenly businesslike. Ezra said you were discussing some important project. Is that true? I looked at her suspiciously. Yes, Tally. I really am the regional director of Atlas Logistics, and we really did sign a contract with your fiancé's company. It's not a lie. And you're really his boss? Her voice sounded doubtful. For this project, yes, I oversee all aspects of logistics. Ezra reports to me in this area. Tally paused for a moment, then her face took on a calculating expression that I knew all too well. Mom thinks you could help us with some investments through Ezra. You'd do it for the family, wouldn't you? So that was it. Now I understood the reason for her sudden interest. No, Tally, I replied firmly. I won't use my professional relationships to further family interests. It would be unethical and could jeopardize my career. Her face darkened. Of course, you always think of yourself. Even now, when you finally have a chance to benefit the family, you refuse. Help the family? I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Tally, you and Mom never considered me part of this family. Until tonight, I was just a disappointment you tried not to mention in polite company. And now that it turns out I have connections you want to use, I'm suddenly your favorite daughter and sister? You're exaggerating as usual. Tally crossed her arms over her chest. We just want you to finally be a part of the family instead of always pushing us away. No, Tally, you want me to be useful. Those are two different things. I noticed Ezra watching our conversation from across the room. His gaze was attentive, and he seemed to be assessing the situation. I have to go, I said, turning away from my sister. Congratulations on your engagement. I hope you'll be happy. Willow, Tally called after me, but I was already heading for the door. On my way out, I stopped to say goodbye to my father. Leaving already? He asked, disappointed. Yes, Dad. I think I've had enough fun for today. He nodded understandingly and gave me a big hug. Call me tomorrow, okay? I will. As I walked through the foyer toward the exit, I heard my name and turned around. It was Ezra, who had quickly caught up with me. I wanted to tell you something else, he said, lowering his voice. I meant what I said. You really impressed me with your professionalism, and I hope that what happened today, my statement and your family's reaction, won't affect our working relationship. It won't, I assured him. I know how to separate the personal from the professional. Good, he smiled with obvious relief. Then I'll see you next week. I'll be in touch to finalize the details. We exchanged farewell handshakes, and I finally stepped out into the cool evening air. As I got into my car, I couldn't help thinking about how much this evening had changed since I arrived. I had arrived as an unwelcome guest, barely tolerated for my father's sake, and was leaving as a valuable business contact whom they were now actively trying to exploit. As I started the engine, I saw my mother and Tally in the rearview mirror. They were looking in my direction, and even from a distance, I could see the disappointment and calculation on their faces. I stepped on the gas and pulled out onto the road, feeling a strange mixture of bitterness and relief. That evening showed me what I had always known deep down. The only person in that family who truly loved me was my father. And for him, I was willing to endure the falsehood and manipulation of my mother and sister. But now that their true motives were so obvious, I knew I would no longer allow them to use me. The drive home had never seemed so long and yet so liberating. I knew that on Monday I would return to my job, to my real life, where I was valued for my merits, not for my potential. And maybe on the weekend I would actually have coffee with my father, the only person in the Kessler family who deserved my time and attention. Monday began as usual. An early wake-up, a cup of strong coffee, a business suit, and a short drive to the Atlas logistic office. But inside, everything was different. The events of Saturday night kept running through my mind, replaying over and over like a stuck movie reel. My mother's expression when Ezra called me his boss, Tally's sudden change in attitude, the pride in my father's eyes, and that strange feeling inside me, a mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. Prue met me at the office door with a tablet and some fresh reports. "Good morning, Miss Kessler." The Nexus Tech team sent the updated specifications for the July deliveries. Also, a Mrs. Kessler tried to reach you 3 times on your phone. I felt my shoulders tense. "Thanks, Prue. Please forward the specifications to me. As for the calls, I'll call back later." Prue nodded and tactfully left, and I closed the office door behind me, trying to collect my thoughts. Of course, my mother wouldn't wait. She already found out where I work and got my number. She's probably going to pressure me about family investments or some other scheme to use my connections with Ezra. I forced myself to focus on work. New specifications from Ezra's team required attention. They significantly changed the parameters of the logistics chain. I spent several hours immersed in calculations and planning, grateful for the opportunity to distract myself from my personal problems. Closer to lunchtime, the phone on my desk rang again. I sighed, expecting to hear my mother's voice, but it was Ezra. "Miss Kessler, I hope I'm not distracting you from anything important?" "Not at all, Mr. Foster. I was just reviewing your new specifications." "Excellent." His voice sounded energetic. "By the way, I hope you haven't changed your mind about our business lunch. Would tomorrow at 1 o'clock be okay?" I agreed, and we arranged to meet at a small restaurant near my office. After the call, I felt a strange sense of relief. At least the professional side of my life hadn't been affected by Saturday's events. In the evening, as I was about to leave work, there was a knock at the door. I expected to see Prue, but standing on the threshold was my mother. Impeccably dressed with perfect hair and an expensive Prada bag, she looked as if she had come to a social gathering rather than an office building. "Mom?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "What are you doing here?" "You didn't answer my calls, dear," she said, entering the office without waiting to be invited and looking around appraisingly. "Not bad. Of course, it's not like your father's office, but it's quite respectable for a start." I felt a familiar irritation, but held it back. "To what do I owe the visit?" My mother sat down in the visitor's chair and put her bag on her lap. "Willow, don't be so cold. I came to talk about business. Family business. I already told Tally that I'm not going to use my business connections for family gain." My mother pursed her lips. "It's not just gain, Willow. It's an opportunity for all of us. You know your father's business is going through a rough patch. The new import policy has hit his suppliers hard, and if we don't find new investors—" "Stop," I raised my hand. "If Dad's in trouble, why didn't he call me himself?" My mother hesitated. "He's too proud, and he doesn't want to worry you." I looked at her suspiciously. My father had never been proud when it came to family. It was my mother who had always insisted on maintaining the appearance of perfect well-being. "I'll talk to Dad," I said finally. "If he really needs help, I'll do everything I can, but not through Ezra." My mother pressed her lips together even tighter. "You've always been so stubborn. Even now, when you finally have a chance to do something real for the family, you refuse." "Something real?" I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "So, until now, I've been useless?" "That's not what I meant." She quickly corrected herself. "It's just that you've always done your own thing without thinking about the family. You ran away from home, chose this strange career. Mom, I interrupted her, feeling anger rising. Let's be honest. You never approved of my decisions. You always considered me a disappointment. And now you're not here because you suddenly realized my value, but because you found out I can be useful. She looked as if I had slapped her. How can you say that? I've always wanted the best for you. The best according to your standards, I corrected her. You wanted me to be a copy of Tally, obedient, predictable, living up to your expectations. But I'm different, Mom, and you know what? I'm glad I am. My mother stood up, clutching the handle of her purse. I see I shouldn't have come. You're still holding a grudge over old differences instead of thinking about the future of the family. No, Mom. I am thinking about the future, my future, and I won't let you or Tally manipulate me using my business connections. She gave me a cold stare. Fine. Then don't be surprised if your father loses the business he's been building for 30 years. It'll be on your conscience. With that, she headed for the door, but I stopped her. Mom, I'll call Dad. Today. And if he really needs help, I'll help him. But I'll do it for him, not for you. She didn't answer, just walked out, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and a heavy feeling in my chest. As soon as the door closed, I grabbed the phone and dialed my father's number. He answered almost immediately. Willie? Is something wrong? Dad, Mom was just at my office. She said you're having problems with your business. Is that true? There was a pause on the other end of the line. There are some difficulties, he finally admitted, but nothing catastrophic. Your mother always dramatizes everything. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to worry you. His voice sounded guilty. You have your own life, your own problems. Dad, you'll never be a worry to me. I felt a lump rising in my throat. Let's meet up tonight? We'll have dinner and talk everything through. Sure, his voice sounded relieved. 7 at Marco's? It's a date. Marco's restaurant was a special place for my father and me. It was a small Italian restaurant where they knew us by name and always had a table for us in the corner, away from prying eyes. A long time ago, when I was a teenager and my war with my mother was at its height, my father often took me here for peace talks, as he called them. My father was already waiting for me when I arrived. He looked tired but smiled sincerely when he saw me. Willie. He stood up to hug me. I'm so glad to see you. We ordered, and when the waiter left, I asked bluntly, Dad, what's going on with your business? Mom said things are really bad. He sighed and rubbed his nose. It's not as bad as she makes it out to be. Yes, we're having problems with suppliers because of new trade restrictions. And yes, we need to restructure some processes, maybe look for new partners. But it's not the end of the world. Why didn't you come to me? I work in logistics, Dad. It's literally my specialty. He smiled sheepishly. You know, I've always been proud that you've achieved everything on your own. I didn't want to ask for help. I thought it might look like I was taking advantage of your success. Dad, that's ridiculous. I shook my head. You're the only person in our family who has always supported me. Of course I'll help you. We spent the next hour discussing his business. I asked questions, took notes, and suggested solutions to problems. And with every passing minute, it became more and more obvious that the situation was not as dire as my mother had described. It was complicated, yes, but it was solvable with the right approach. You know, my father said when we finished our discussion, you're incredibly knowledgeable about this. I always knew you were a smart girl, but seeing you analyze business processes, it's impressive. I felt myself blushing at his praise. Thanks, Dad. It's just my job. No, it's more than just a job. It's a talent. He paused, then added more quietly. I've always known you were special, Willie. Even when your mom said you were just stubborn and headstrong, I saw strength of character and independence in you. I just couldn't always protect you from her criticism. And I regret that. I reached out and squeezed his hand. You did what you could, Dad. I never blamed you. Maybe I should have done more. He shook his head. I let your mother dictate the terms in our family because it was easier. And when you left, part of me left with you. The next day began with a message from Ezra confirming our meeting. I spent the morning preparing for dinner, reviewing reports, and compiling a list of questions I wanted to discuss. It was a purely business dinner, and I intended to maintain a professional tone despite our new family ties. The restaurant Ezra chose was a small French bistro with a cozy atmosphere and discreet service, the perfect place for a business conversation. Ezra was already waiting for me at a table in the corner, immersed in the menu. When I approached, he looked up and smiled. "Miss Kessler, it's good to see you. Please call me Willow," I said, sitting down across from him. "After all, we're practically family now." He laughed. "Then you can call me Ezra, although I must admit, it feels strange to be discussing business with my future sister-in-law." "I hope it won't affect our professional relationship," I said, taking out my tablet with the prepared materials. "Not at all." He shook his head. "I always keep my personal and professional lives separate. Speaking of personal matters, how did your family react to the news of our business partnership?" "After you left, of course." I paused for a moment, wondering how candid to be. "Let's just say they suddenly discovered a potential in me that they hadn't noticed in the previous 32 years. Ezra nodded knowingly. "I know the feeling. My mother only started being proud of me after I made my first million. My mom came to my office yesterday. I decided to be honest. She hopes I'll use our business partnership to advance the family interests." "And what did you say?" "That I don't intend to mix personal and professional matters." Ezra nodded approvingly. "I respect that approach." Tally also tried to find out something about our business relationship, but I told her the same thing. We placed our order and moved on to discussing the project. Ezra turned out to be not only a talented businessman, but also an attentive listener. He asked precise questions, quickly grasped the essence of problems, and offered unconventional solutions. I found myself thinking that working with him was a pleasure. "You know," he said at one point, "I'm impressed by your professionalism, especially considering the circumstances." "What circumstances?" "Family," he shrugged. "Many in your position would have tried to use the situation to their advantage, or conversely, would have turned down the project to avoid a potential conflict of interest. I've worked too hard to get where I am to risk it for family intrigue," I replied honestly. The next few days passed in the usual work mode. I ignored my mother's calls and Tally's messages, focusing on the project with Ezra's company and helping my father restructure his business. Every evening we talked on the phone, discussing his progress and new ideas. On Friday evening, as I was about to leave for home, there was a knock on my office door. This time it was Tally. She didn't look as flawless as usual. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and she looked nervous. "Hi," she said, shifting uncertainly from one foot to the other. "Can I come in?" I nodded, pointing to the visitor's chair. "What brings you here?" Tally sat down, clutching her designer handbag. "You didn't answer your phone." "I was busy." "So busy you couldn't spare 5 minutes for your family?" Her voice was reproachful. "Tally," I sighed, "let's not pretend. You didn't come here because you missed me. You have an agenda." She looked hurt, but quickly regained her composure. "Okay, yes. I came to talk about Mom. She's very upset that you're ignoring her calls." "I already told her I won't use my business connections for family drama. My position hasn't changed." "But Dad—" "I help Dad directly," I interrupted. "We discuss his business every night. And believe me, the situation isn't as dire as Mom makes it out to be." Tally looked surprised. "You talk every night?" "Yes," I nodded. "And I gave him some advice on restructuring the logistics chain. He's already started implementing the changes." "He didn't tell me," she said, sounding hurt. "Maybe because you didn't ask," I suggested. "You and Mom were too busy figuring out how to use my connections with Ezra." Tally flushed. "That's not fair, Willow. We just want to help Dad." "No, Tally. You want to use the situation. If you really wanted to help Dad, you would have asked him what he needed instead of scheming behind his back." My sister stood up, her face pale with anger. "You always thought you were better than us, didn't you? Special. But you know what? You're just a selfish person who only thinks about herself. If thinking about myself means not letting others manipulate me and use my achievements for their own gain, then yes, I'm selfish," I said, standing up too. "And I'm proud of it." Tally grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "You'll regret this, Willow." Mom was right. You've always been a disappointment to this family. The door slammed behind her, and I sank back into my chair, feeling a strange mixture of anger and relief. For the first time in my life, I hadn't let my mother or sister's words hurt me. For the first time, I truly believed that my decisions and my path were right. On Saturday morning, my father called, "Willie, you won't believe it. That supplier from Singapore you recommended has agreed to our terms. We're signing the contract next week." "That's wonderful, Dad." I was genuinely happy for him. "And it's all thanks to you," he said with undisguised pride in his voice. "Your advice was invaluable. I'm glad I could help. Listen, I was thinking, maybe you'd like to be a consultant for my company? Unofficially, of course. I'd just ask your advice on logistics from time to time." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "I'd love to, Dad. You know I'm always here for you." "I know, Willie, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it." He paused, then added, "By the way, Tally called yesterday. She said you had a fight." "Yes," I sighed. "She came to my office demanding that I answer Mom's calls. When I refused, she said I was a disappointment to the family." My father sighed heavily. "I'm sorry you have to hear that, Willie. You've never been a disappointment to me. On the contrary, you've always been my pride and joy." "Thanks, Dad," I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "That means more to me than you know." "You know, I always dreamed that one day we would work together," he confessed. "When you were little, I imagined bringing you to the office and showing you how everything worked. But then your mother insisted on ballet school and piano lessons and all those things she thought were necessary for a proper lady. And I always preferred taking apart your old calculator and building forts out of boxes in the garage," I laughed, remembering. "Yes," he laughed too. "You were always more like me than your mother. Maybe that's why she had such a hard time understanding you." "Maybe," I thought, "but that doesn't excuse how she treated me, and how she's trying to use me now." "I know, sweetheart, and I'm not asking you to forgive or forget. Just don't close your heart completely, okay? Not for them, but for yourself." "Don't worry, Dad. I'm fine. Really fine." Perhaps for the first time in a long time. And it was true. Despite the confrontation with my mother and sister, despite the bitter words and accusations, I felt an inner confidence and calm that I hadn't felt before. I knew who I was, and I knew my worth, and I no longer needed the approval or recognition of those who had never accepted me for who I was. On Monday morning, I received an email from Ezra inviting me to a corporate dinner to celebrate the launch of the Nexus Tech project. "There will be many important partners and investors," he wrote. "Your presence as head of logistics is essential. P.S. Tally will be there too, but don't worry, it's strictly business." I accepted, not without a slight feeling of unease. Seeing my sister after our last confrontation could be awkward, but I wasn't going to let my personal relationships affect my career. That evening, I called my father to tell him about the invitation and ask for his advice. "I think you should go," he said firmly. "It's important for your career. As for Tally, just be professional and polite. Don't let her drag you into a conflict." "You're right," I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "By the way, how's it going with the new supplier?" We got into a discussion about his business, and I felt the tension melt away. My father always knew how to calm me down, even when I was a child. His calm, level-headed approach to problems helped me see things more clearly. When I hung up, I walked over to the window of my apartment and looked out at the city below. Franklin had never been the perfect place for me. Too small, too conservative, too full of memories. But now, for the first time since I had returned here after college, I felt like I could find a place here. Not as the daughter of Veronica and Raymond Kessler, not as Tallulah's sister, but as Willow Kessler, regional director of Atlas Logistics, a successful woman who had built her own life. I no longer needed my mother's approval or my sister's recognition. I had my career, my independence, and my father, who had always believed in me. And that was enough. More than enough.